Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast. I'm your host, Trey Walsh, and today we have a big guest for you, Peter McCormack. So this episode was really crazy for me because I found myself on his podcast just a few months ago after writing a little article for Bitcoin Magazine, and I'm really honored that he decided and was willing to come on my podcast and take a seat in the guest seat, which was really exciting. Really enjoyed this chat. We talked about Bitcoin. We talked about his story, his background, and what brought him to where he is today. We talked about seeking truth in this day and age and a wide variety of other things. So really hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Before we get to the show, though, I do want to mention that I've started a new partnership with Bitcoin Magazine that I'm really excited to announce. And we're going to be offering a promotion code for Jason Maier's book, A Progressive's Case for Bitcoin. Now, that's going to be in the show notes. But if you use promo code TPB in Bitcoin Magazine store, you're going to get 10% off of his book. So if you haven't gotten his book yet and haven't read it yet, or if you have and you need to order more copies for your friends and family, go and do that. Use our promo code that's in the show notes or use it in the store, TPB at checkout, and you're going to get 10% off of that. All right, I'll let you get to the show. As always, if you have any questions or comments for us, please feel free to reach out. hello@progressivebitcoiner.com, and we will see you all next week. Hey, Peter, thanks for jumping on the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast.
Not a problem. You're turning the tables on me now.
This is wild. So for those that don't know, many of you might. So I was on Peter's podcast back in March down in New York after writing this little article in Bitcoin Magazine and then sending it to Peter, just wanting to see if, I was on the right course. I'd been listening to you. And you're one of the reasons I probably got into Bitcoin because it was normal messaging, people I could resonate with, that kind of stuff. Sent you an article and was just like, let me know what you think. If I'm on the right course, was trying to tie Bitcoin into my nonprofit stuff and what I'm doing. And then you were like, why don't you come on down and talk about it? Which was wildly unexpected. Got through the gatekeeper, Danny, and Danny asked some great questions, which I tell people all the time. And I've mentioned to a couple of people, I don't know if he would ever do it, but him jumping on a podcast, I don't know. Has he? Do you know if he's jumped on a podcast?
I don't think he's done a podcast as a guest. He's done a couple of live events. He's been
he's been more vocal for sure.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is very surreal and weird to now have you on my podcast and to even have a podcast at this point, because that's a whole nother thing. So super appreciative. You've been super supportive. This is great. This is gonna be fun. I'm looking forward.
Well, listen, look, I'm glad you're doing this. I think it's important that we have a range of voices, both sides of the microphone in this space. And so I think it's cool that you're doing it. Any support, help you need, you know where I am, you know where Danny is. We're here to help.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that kind of leads into my first initial kickoff question is, why support a progressive Bitcoin message, if you will, or our more messaging targeted at progressives? You and Danny seem to be intentional, and you mentioned before you were intentional about that in terms of guests, in terms of things you're supporting. Not that that's your sole focus, but getting more of that in. So for you, what was the reason in wanting to do that?
Yes, that's a great first question, and I really hope some conservative or libertarian Bitcoiners listen to this show and what we talk about, because I think the nuance is often lost in the world of Twitter or whatever. It isn't about supporting a progressive podcast. It's about supporting all voices, wherever you are. So there was a period of time when we were doing the podcast and I was reading the reviews up on Chartable, and a couple of people had said, it's all right-wing or libertarian people. There's no voices from the left here at all. There's no progressive voices. And
what time was that, do you think? Like when?
That was a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And firstly, it wasn't true. We have had progressive voices on.
Right.
But it was true that there was definitely a bias towards people from the right or libertarians. And I'm not saying those people are the same, but there are some strong shared ideas between libertarians and conservatives. And so I said to Danny, if Bitcoin is to succeed, or for Bitcoin to succeed, or to get Bitcoin in as many hands as possible, it's really important that all voices are heard. And so let's we're in this position where apparently, I mean, I think we have, it's a weird thing to say, but we've got the largest Bitcoin podcast, and we have a duty and a responsibility to talk to everyone and bring as many people on the show as possible. So let's make a push to have more progressives on the show. So we put it out there, put it up on Twitter. And we had a whole bunch of people reach out to us. We did a little spell. I think we had Mark Goodwin on the show, and a few others came on at the same time, came over to the UK. And look, these shows don't historically do well for us.
Yeah.
If you say
mine didn't. I know that. Well, at least on YouTube, I'm not sure.
Yeah, because you're new. What goes well on YouTube is a big name. If you're Saylor or Lynn Alden, it's a Beatty title. And so we knew the shows wouldn't do too well. We knew it would trigger people, but we knew there was a responsibility to do this because there are shared philosophies and shared ideas between both conservatives and progressives with regards to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And when you've got Elizabeth Warren and an anti-crypto army lying about Bitcoin or attacking it, she's not going to listen to Ted Cruz or conservatives. But she might listen to a Democrat politician who's been orange pilled, and her constituents might listen to a Trey or a Mark Goodwin. And so for us, it was a really important job to do. And it's like I said, when I wrote the foreword to Jason Maier's book, I think he wrote the most important book for conservative Bitcoiners, because you can argue over guns and abortion and trans rights, all those things. The one thing you all agree on is Bitcoin, and you do not want to fight over this. You do not want this to be a political football. So for us, it was a really important thing to do. But it's a challenging thing to do because I've got one foot that's in America and one foot that's in the UK. I spend not half my time, but I spend a lot of time in the US making this podcast and a lot of time in the UK. And I often reference my pinned tweet, how Americans see me versus how Brits see me. If anyone's not seen that, I say Americans see me as this like screaming lefty liberal, and people in the UK see me as Alex Jones. And I think some people some Americans haven't taken the time to like really understand what position that puts me in. They sit from a position of a conservative American and they go, why do you believe that? You're wrong. You're a crazy liberal. Whereas in the UK, I'm a conservative. I'm seen as a conservative. But conservatives in the UK have a lot of shared ideas with progressives in the US, because even our Conservative Party is fairly progressive on certain ideas. And so it's a very careful balance to walk, because one of the biggest challenges with a Twitter profile or the podcast is audience capture. And I want to avoid that as best I can. And I will not be captured by the audience for the sake of making money. I'm always going to stay true to myself. And so we do this, we bring progressives on, we talk to progressives because we think it's an important part of the conversation. But if it was the other way around, if Bitcoin was born from progressives and there weren't many conservatives, I would have made a push for conservatives. So it isn't about supporting progressives. It's actually about supporting everyone.
Yeah. And I resonate with that because I am progressive and left, but also, my own background. I was born have you spent any time in Virginia, like outside of DC?
No, but I'm conscious of politically how Virginia is.
Yeah. So it's changed a bit as well, but I grew up in the southwestern part of the state, very rural, very Trump now, that kind of affiliation. So for me, I don't think a lot of people know that too. And I'll talk to people a lot. And I think why I can resonate with a lot of people on the right is because that's my family. That's a lot of people I grew up with. And so for me, it also, yes, I'm a progressive, I'm left. I've only ever voted Democrat in my adult life. But for me, if Bitcoin was mostly progressives, I'd probably be saying, hey, we need to do a better job of pulling in some from the right. And the only reason I'm really interested in the things I talked about on your podcast or even here is that there is such a small minority of louder voices or people putting out media that's targeted at progressive left or just mainstream in general, right? So that's why I'm doing this. And Jason and I have talked about this like 5-10 years down the line. And I think you mentioned on your podcast too, let's drop the progressive, or maybe if it's kind of an in title only for whatever this podcast is, or, future endeavors. Jason's mentioned he might write different types of books because he's an educator, right? It's not about, we want progressives to dominate the narrative. It's that there is no progressive narrative or bent in Bitcoin. And that's my motivation as well. And I completely share that. My views aside, that's my main motivator right now, at least.
Yeah. So I received an email this morning from someone who listened to my show with Margot and Troy, and he took issue with me putting people in.
Great episode, by the way.
Thank you.
Like, fantastic. I'm gonna have Margot on next week, so I'll try to not hit too many of the same points.
She's great, and they said stop putting people in camps. This is Bitcoin. We're neither left nor right. And I pushed back on them and said, look, that's where you want people to be, but I'm going to meet people where they are, and there are people in the camps of the left and right. And what I recognize is whether you're left or right, and whether you're captured in this kind of polarized fight, you're still part of that machine that grows bigger and bigger and steals more and more from everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're left or right. Inflation is stealing from people, and there's a real issue with the government, especially in the US. And so I'm going to meet people where they are. I'm going to talk to them about Bitcoin in a language that they understand, or bring on people to talk about it in a language they understand. And hopefully there's this meeting in the middle. Because one of the great things is that you take Bitcoin out of this. If you were sat in a pub and you sat down with like some staunch Republican, there's not going to be much you're going to agree on. You're probably going to argue the whole time, and it's not going to be very productive. But if you meet a conservative Bitcoiner, you can sit down. You're going to talk about Bitcoin. You two are probably going to be friends and get on. And then all that other shit, all that stuff which the media or the politicians push that creates the divide, I think that'll eventually melt away, because you're going to focus on the most important things, which is freedom to use the money you want and get away from this kind of growing surveillance state that controls every part of our life. And so let's meet people where they are, talk to them in the language they understand. But once we've got them together, let's just talk about Bitcoin.
And that's where, I've heard a lot of people on the right, not to name names, who are in Bitcoin that said, yeah, I voted for Obama in 2008, or I would advocate for that. And you know what his messaging was? And it was brilliant. And the reason he resonated with so many Americans at the time was he talked about the problems. Like, hey, your paycheck isn't enough. Your housing situation isn't fun. Your healthcare, you can't go and see the doctor. It just, like, what is wrong, right? And that's a great starting point for Bitcoin. And what I want this podcast to be about too is, we can talk about Bitcoin price, the tech, all of that, and people will get into that. And we'll probably cover some of that on this show, but a lot of it is, why was Bitcoin created? The whys, what's wrong, right? If you start there, then you start getting away from the FUD from the left, the whatever cultural stuff from the right, that starts fading away. And then you focus on, why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why is Bitcoin here?
Yeah, and when you get into that, it's solving problems that affect you. It doesn't matter whether you are conservative or progressive. It just doesn't matter. It affects you exactly the same. All the difficulties in running a business, in getting banking services, in maintaining your wealth. Like, in the end, a very important thing that politicians push is your money. Having your own money, controlling your money, looking after your money. No one likes to raise taxes. Raising taxes isn't popular, but all those things about why Bitcoin is created, that is for anyone, wherever you are in the political divide. So I'm just to repeat, I'm saying meet people where they are, talk to them in a language they understand, and then let's come together. And I think, I really do feel like Bitcoin is a unifying force for the polarization that happens. But again, the United States is very unique. If you compare it to Europe, if you come to Europe, you're not going to see this massive divide. Some people are trying to stoke the fires and make it happen, but it's not really the same. Both primary parties are much more towards the center. There's much more civil engagement. And so we don't, it's important I think for some Americans to just recognize the world outside of America. It's very different. You're not going to convert a European into a conservative American, because we're culturally very different. We're just very different people. As I'm not going to convert a conservative Republican American into like a British conservative, because it's a very different person. Guns is a great example. I'm very anti-guns, and I've heard all the arguments. I totally get the arguments. Now, I can be a conservative British person and be anti-gun, and I'm in the 99%. I can't be that in America. And so my view is very nuanced. I'm not, I don't, I'm anti-gun. I'm anti for the UK. If there was a referendum, should we legalize guns in the UK? I would vote no, as would 99.9% of the population. Now and I recognize there is an issue with guns in America, but I'm not here saying America should ban guns. it's your country, it's your rules. Like, I understand the history and why you have them, but if I'm going to do that, you need to extend that back to us. You can't turn around to me and say, well, the UK, you're just a bunch of pussies because you don't have guns and you should change. You're trying to change the culture of an entire country where nobody wants it. So, if you want me to meet you where you are, you're going to meet me where I am.
Yeah, and you all had a different, not to go on a huge tangent, hugely different experience in the founding of your country, the people groups in World War II, World War I and II, right? When you have those like giant things that happen and bombs coming to your country, that's when you all united on healthcare, right? Like those types of things. It's culturally massively different, and that's a whole other podcast we could do, right? But it's funny, I had Mark Stefani on, who used to run this podcast yesterday. He's in healthcare. So we did a whole episode talking about health and healthcare and those kind of things. But that's another huge divide, and you can't compare, right? I was in Switzerland recently, a couple weeks ago. And again, completely different. There's so many things you see in a small, sometimes homogenous group, whether it's Netherlands, Switzerland, things like that. The US is just a completely different beast, for better or for worse, on all of these topics. But I will say, so you get feedback, obviously, on the podcast from, when you have progressives on, but also those from the right. Do you have data or statistics on any of that feedback, I guess, from Europeans? Are there more Europeans that are kind of anti-state in that libertarian group that are reaching out, or is it overwhelmingly, your US-based listeners?
No, listen, it's all anecdotal data.
Yeah, 100%. Just what you're seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, there will be people in Europe who are considering themselves libertarians, and therefore, I think it's quite a lonely existence being a libertarian in Europe, because there aren't many of them, and they identify with a lot of the libertarian Bitcoiners, and therefore, when they go to conferences, they will spend times with your Safer Deans, your Stefan Liveras, and they have a real affinity with them. But it's not an idea that's particularly well known or popular. If I sat down in the pub with my friends and said, "What is libertarianism?" Most of them wouldn't know and wouldn't care. And if you explain it to them, they'll say, "Well, that sounds weird." And so I just think we're in a very different space in Europe with regards to this, and therefore, anecdotally, what I find in Europe is that my podcast, I would say,
your European episodes feel very different. When you have those guests on, it's a very, I would say, different show. It's great, but it feels like a different show in a lot of ways. And sometimes I enjoy those episodes more. It depends. Yep.
Well, we're not disagreeing on much.
That's true.
A great lens for that. If you look at Ukraine, Russia, there's a real proximity to what I see as people's views on that. So if you are in Eastern Europe, you talk to a Matthew Mizhinsky, who's in Eastern Europe, but you talk to anyone in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, any of the old or Soviet Republic countries, it's almost universal support for Ukraine. And as you go through most of Europe, it's, as you get further away, it's either universal support or indifference. I literally don't know a single person in Europe who is repeating Putin propaganda. Now, you will see it on Twitter. You will see that more, what would be considered far right. I don't mean like far right white supremacy, but like pretty strong right people from the right who are, repeating some of that propaganda. But it's very rare. It's almost universal support. But once you get to the US, that political divide is hit, and you will see people repeating, Putin's Russian propaganda, and that is just because, again, we're very different here. We've not politicized everything. Sometimes we're just like, what is the rational, reasonable take? Well, Ukraine is an independent democratic country. It was illegally invaded by a bully mafia state, which has a history of conflict. Under Putin's regime, it's Chechnya, Georgia, Ukraine, 2014. We've seen Putin assassinate people or attempt to assassinate people across Europe. He poisoned multiple people with nerve agents in the UK on UK soil. He's tried to assassinate his biggest. It's Navalny. He tried to kill Navalny. Now Navalny is now hooked up in prison. We fully recognize there is no free speech in Russia. If you're a journalist who criticizes the government, you will probably end up with a bullet in the back of your head. Like, we're not idiots. We see that all. And so when Russia invades Ukraine, it's pretty clear what's happening. And yes, look, was Ukraine corrupt? Yes, we know that. But at the same time, we know what's happening there. When you go back to the US and you see the response, you know there's a political divide on this for the left and the right. And what I would love to know, I'd be really interested. I just interviewed Balaji and I mentioned the same to him. Say Trump had won the last election, and ignore the fact that Trump thinks there wouldn't have been a Russia-Ukraine war if he'd been in power. Say Russia had invaded Ukraine under Trump's watch. Would Trump have supported Ukraine? Would he have sent weapons to Ukraine? And would it then be the conservatives, the Republicans in America saying, we should support them. We need to stop Russia. We don't want Russia to rebuild the Soviet Union. And would it be then the Democrats saying, why are we getting involved in another foreign war? And I don't know the answer to that.
Look at COVID, right? I mean, it's pretty clear. The vaccine started rolling out under Trump, right? He was on an interview recently, I believe, where he was like, I'm not allowed to talk about the vaccine. For some reason, that's not popular, right? I can't talk about it, right? So, there's moments of, I don't give him too much credit, clarity from Trump when he just spits out the truth of like, it's a vaccine or whatever. And again, not to have that debate, all of that stuff, but just in general, when you are CEO of a country, those politics kind of go away. Like in your department, like you got war generals coming and being like, Russia's like pretty crazy. They just invaded this country, nuclear power, one of our biggest foes. Like, but a fight for Ukraine is a fight to support the way the world has been going, for better or for worse. So yes, Trump would do exactly what we are doing now, for better or for worse. And I think both the left and the right, again, when you talk about money, you talk about information, the one thing that I would hope, and I've talked to some of my progressive friends and talked to my own wife about, is like, it is a bit crazy. We write checks for a country out of taxpayer or debt dollars, money printing dollars, unanswered, unchecked, right? That doesn't have to be a political thing, right? Again, it might be, yes, we should, or no, we shouldn't, or something like that, right? So there is more of a disbelief and a questioning consistently in the US, arguably since Watergate, and you keep going down that. And that's a deeply left, progressive, anarchist kind of background. So I think regardless of president, they would do the same thing. So people should question. People have a right to question. But the problem is with social media and all these other things, they just keep going and there's no end. There's no truth when you go down that rabbit hole.
It's tribalism. Sadly, people have putting themselves in the place where they're picking a tribe, and whatever the tribe believes, they believe. And there isn't much pushback from within tribes. And so it just becomes this eternal fight. Twitter is very different for me from 8 in the morning till about 11 when it's European Twitter. It's very, very different. When America wakes up, everything goes a bit batshit crazy and everyone's arguing about the same stuff. And, to the point where I just get, almost some of the people I follow, it just gets a bit tiring, with the things they're saying. They're repeating the same messages over and over again. Sadly, it's because social media rewards this. Doesn't matter whether you're left or the right, social media rewards the building of echo chambers and tribes. And so as an outside observer with one foot in the UK and Europe and one foot in America, I think I can see quite clearly what's going on in America. A lot of people think I'm a fucking idiot, but actually I come from a position of spending a lot of time in both camps and see what's going on in both camps. And I can criticize Europe and UK very easily. Don't get me wrong on that. But I can also see this stupid war playing out in America that no one's benefited from. The thing I said to Balaji, as somebody who's divorced, it very much reminds me of the end of a relationship where you just don't agree on anything. You fight on every issue. When you fight on one issue, you bring up all the old issues. Really, you just need to not be together anymore because there's nobody is working together for the better of the electorate. They are working together for the better of the party and the better of power. And when you get into that place, you're being manipulated, and that's the left and the right. And there's honestly, the criticisms they have of each other are so hypocritical.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest differences. In the UK, I was very impressed. Again, for better for worse, your prime ministers, if there's some sort of conflict, or whether it's in the party or people, they'll resign. You guys will roll through prime ministers or elected officials. in the US, that concept of resigning, or even we'll see what happens with the Trump indictment stuff, but even an elected official, which I would argue many should have faced criminal charges. And I think I might agree with that, especially with Iraq and wars in the past. In the US, just a foreign concept that shows that inverse. And I do wish we'd get back a little more to like the electorate, the people, when we said, hey, that's messed up and you're done, that you're done, right? Regardless of what political party that is. The problem is the parties are the ones deciding, right? Democrats are like, Trump should be locked up. Republicans are like, Biden should be locked up. The party is leading that message. The people, meanwhile, we're squabbling on Twitter, and life continues on the same year after year after year. We've got an election in a year and a half coming up. Do I have any hope that anything would be different? No. And that's why I'm into Bitcoin, because I'm like, that system and our politics are not working. Maybe this Bitcoin thing can just, I'm kind of done trying to work with that system. Let's try to do this, and then we'll force them to eradicate or change that system. That seems the only way.
I think I'm on the same page as you now. It took me a while. It's taken me years to shed all my kind of status skin. And it took me some time, probably, like in the US, I think people are more distrusting of government, certainly from the conservative side, and rightly so, whereas we're a little more trusting here. So when COVID happened and they talked about lockdowns and told us what was going on, I believed it a bit quicker, and I didn't question enough. Going through COVID, post-COVID, we've now got the select committee doing their investigation into COVID, and generally having my eye open to the way media works and the kind of relationship between mainstream media and politics, I've kind of got to that point where I'm like, okay, look, I get it now. Yes, I still like the idea of democracy. I think whether you like democracy or not, the state is, I think, a natural monopoly that doesn't go away. But I won't vote again. Like, there's nobody, because what am I voting for? I don't believe either party. I don't believe they work for the benefit of the electorate. I don't believe they make the tough decisions that they should do. I think they work for the power and they work for careers. And so what can I do? Well, I can work on creating independent media, which challenges them. And I can work on Bitcoin, which challenges the sovereignty of individuals versus the sovereignty of the state. And if we can create enough power to the individual, if we can shift the balance back from the state to the electorate, then maybe we will get better politicians in the long run. Maybe we will get a stronger and better democracy because of that. But I'm done trying to defend democracy, because democracy in its current state is completely broken because of the incentive model.
Yeah, 100%. That leads me to one of my questions that I wanted to get to you on is, where do you think for you this, search and thirst for truth and investigation came from? Because you've been doing this for a while. Like, you've tried different documentary series, different podcast ventures, different things like that. Traveling around the world, asking questions, yes, about money, but also about, corrupt governments, things like this. And I think whatever criticism people can throw your way, whether you're, what did you say? Like, people think I'm an idiot or statist or whatever.
Statist cock or whatever.
Yeah. But you clearly, ever since you jumped ship, which I also want to talk about, your career change, you really have a yearning for the truth. And I definitely share that, right? Whether you're investigating or whether you're like, I want to do a documentary about this because I went there, and it's like, that's weird. I'm curious. So where do you think that stemmed from?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I'm an oddball in my family. I'm the odd one. Compared to my brother and sister, mum and dad, I'm completely the oddball of the family. I don't know. I've always had an empathy in me. I've had an empathy for people who have a tough life, and I very early on, got very interested in the way the world works. I read John Pilger early on. I'm not sure I completely agree with him everything now. But I just became interested in the way the world works. And I spent 2 decades working in advertising. And during that period, I watched Jerry Maguire, and he wrote that manifesto at the start of the film, The Things We Think and Do Not Say. And during my career in advertising, I realized I'm a fucking liar here. What am I doing? I'm trying to convince people to buy shit they don't need. And when we're trying to convince clients to spend money with us, we're trying to make the stats sound as best as possible. And I just felt completely unfulfilled. It was triggered at a time when I got divorced. I was like, I just can't do this shit anymore. Like, for me, the truth is really important. And I get a lot wrong, but I don't do it wrong on purpose, and I don't lie. So you can throw any argument you can say, Pete, you were pro lockdown. I was, because I thought it was the right thing at the time. I had a friend who's a doctor who I spoke to, I interviewed actually, and got very upset talking about there was a trickle of people and suddenly an inflow of people who couldn't breathe. And it sounded scary. And when the government said they came out and they're going to do a lockdown, it sounded like the right thing at the time to do to get to grips with it. Obviously, it wasn't.
But can we talk about that too? Being a Bitcoin podcast, like that did feel like the right thing. We had never seen this ever before, right? 2020's hindsight, but like you saying at the time, it seemed right. Like that is you using your brain and your experiences doing what felt right at the time. Everyone who's like, I knew from the beginning, I'm like, no, you did. You just didn't trust anything or anyone. Sure, that's true. That's true. Like Fauci, a lot of proof and clarity that shows that man lied many times, right? On many things. And people in positions of power that did know, those backdoor conversations, those are things we find out after the fact, right? That is very true. But the average Joe Schmo that sees a tweet and says like, oh, when New York hospitals were being flooded and it was terrifying for a couple of months. Now, 6 months in, we knew pretty quickly, relatively speaking, that, okay, it's not an apocalyptic state that we thought in terms of locking down to the degree we did. Like early on, I wore like winter gloves to the grocery store. This was like 2 weeks in, and I'm in New England, right? So we were like New York, Boston. There was a big outbreak at Biogen, one of the pharmaceutical conferences. People didn't know. They were like, leave your cardboard outside for a week if you get a package. Wild. It was wild. And I but then quickly I was like, okay, we're young people, healthy, eat well, all that. I don't have to be too worried. But early on, we had no idea what was going on. I just wanted, because too many people say like, I knew. And I'm like, some people did, but you didn't. You were just skeptical of everything.
Yeah, but give the people credit where they deserve it. Some people knew that this was stupid. I mean, like when you think about it critically, it's a virus. At some point you open up, and at some point it's going to spread. You can't stop it. And I don't think I thought about it enough, and I was wrong. And I said some pretty stupid things. But like going back to my previous point, it's like when you're out there and you've got millions of people listening to your show and 500,000 followers on Twitter, sometimes you're going to be wrong, and that's tough because those things you get wrong follow you around. But I will always say when I'm wrong and apologize. And I want to go, because I can't. COVID thing we've done so many times, any place. But that search for the truth is really important. But the sad thing about the search for the truth is I'm finding it really hard to get there now, because on every issue there seems to be arguments and counter arguments, and all can sound compelling on whatever issue there is. And so I've kind of found myself in this position where I do want to find the truth. I want to share the truth. I think that's the most important thing you can do. I don't understand lying. I mean, I understand lying as a parent to protect children, right? And little white lies. But I don't understand lying as a career or lying professionally. I don't understand it because I think you've got no morals. Have you got no backbone? And so and then for me, it's just I like meeting people. I like going to weird places, and I like talking to them and finding out about their lives. And I like sharing that. I think, if anything, the one thing where you can map from my career in advertising to what I do now is I like storytelling. I like the creative process of storytelling, but I can't tell you where it's come from. It's just sometimes it's just that there's a thing in you which you like doing, and I like talking to people.
So talking about advertising, I dug up you wrote a 2015 article on how online advertising doesn't work on Medium.
Yeah, well, that was my Jerry Maguire. So that's my.
So I was like, was that the beginning of the end? Yeah.
But it was a roll of the dice, and at the same time, my career suicide. In that, Jerry Maguire wrote the things we think and do not say. He thought that he worked for a faceless media agency that represented players, and he said these are the things, and he put the manuscript out. Everybody loved it. He got fired and kicked out of the business because they knew the danger of this. The danger of this is that it'll be a more personal relationship, more honest relationship. you make less money. This was my version of that. Online advertising does not work. Now, of course it does work, but if you go into the nuance of the article, I talk about the bullshit of the industry. And what we did is when I published it as the front page of our website. And then I sent all my clients to it. And my hope for that is people will go, oh my God, he's telling the truth. This is amazing. That's the agency we need to work with. It didn't really work out like that. Now I got some great feedback. I mean, it took me 6 weeks to write to get the wording correct. We got so much good feedback. People saying, I love this. This is great. This is amazing. But nothing changed. And within months, I'd quit the industry, which is kind of what I wanted to do anyway.
So that was, if you don't mind me asking, right around divorce time, right around what, talk, because you've mentioned before on podcasts. And again, I'm cognizant of like how many different things you've said on different podcasts, and I don't want to repeat all that, right? So, your Silk Road experience, Bitcoin, what was that timeline? So that article was like 2015.
So TLDR, it was it's really a decade ago. I got married in 2013. 3 months later, we separated because my wife was having an affair at the time, which started before our marriage. I found out afterwards. Went into just like a very shitty place. I loved the woman, right? And developed a very unhealthy drug and drink problem, and essentially rode the roller coaster down to rock bottom, and just went to an awful point where there was one day where I was just literally doing cocaine all day, ended up in an ambulance, and like I said, I've told it a bunch of times, I hit rock bottom, quit advertising, and then took a year off work. I think that was most of 2016, and but during that period discovered Bitcoin, and here we are 6 years later with a podcast, a few documentaries, a football team, a bar, and conversation with you.
Yeah, that's incredible. Do you ever, I think I share this with you too, but you're not going to sit on a podcast and be like, wow, look at my life. Look how great I'm doing. Look at where I've come. But that's a journey. I don't know what percentage of people would come out like that. Like you could have kept going and not physically be here today, right? So do you ever take a step back and feel that sense of gratitude or that sense of appreciation of like, that was a challenging thing I did? And yes, there are people that support you along the way. But what's that like for you to reflect on that?
I mean, look, Trey, I was very lucky. I there's a chain of events that if it doesn't happen, I'm in a different world, a different life. But starting a podcast, and it could have been any topic, and I picked Bitcoin just before Bitcoin moons, and I get some great interviews, and I end up having a podcast in an industry that pays well.
So do you think, because you've covered a lot of different topics on your show, one of the inspirations I draw for this one is there'll be many episodes where I might talk about Bitcoin for 5 minutes, but I'm talking about things that I think are tangential or relate to the world Bitcoin is talking about. Those are my most interesting conversations that I'm looking forward to. I think you could have talked about, your podcast could have been about anything, and I think you would have found similar success because of the way you frame conversations. But that's just my thought.
Well, yeah, but like I'm a hard worker. I've built 4 businesses in my life that turn over £1 million, and my agency employed 45 people. Like this podcast has 7 full-time staff. I now run a football. Like I know how to run businesses, right. So I would have created a business. I've always had the entrepreneurial spirit, but the chain of events have led me to having the life that I'm living now. There's a lot of luck in there, and I'm very grateful for it. But with my football team, I'm getting to live my dream, and then in doing a podcast and making documentaries, I get to do what I think is, like, outside of playing guitar Metallica or playing up front for England, I get to do the best job in the world. And so I feel very fortunate about that. Look, none of this would have happened without my divorce, which is a really weird thing to look at because I lost the woman I love, and my family was broken up. My kids went through, certainly my son went through a harder upbringing because of that. But I have all this good stuff that's come off the back of it, where I get to travel the world and meet cool people and make shows. So it's a really weird world looking at both of them. But I wouldn't change anything because I love what I get to do. But it was very tough. There was a 2-year spell that was really, really hard. I mean, I went through chronic depression and anxiety. I mean, coming off drugs, I spent a year with just chronic anxiety and panic attacks. Like sometimes I couldn't get out of bed, and I solved that through running. Through running, I've discovered the Rich Roll podcast, and I'd go also because of veganism, because my mum getting sick, she went vegan, so I went vegan. So I'd go running, listen to his podcast, and the running got rid of the anxiety. But mum's cancer required me to get cannabis oil. Well, I needed Bitcoin to get cannabis oil, so I got the Bitcoin, and then I went to a Rich Roll retreat, and then hung out with him in LA and said, I want to do your job. And he's like, well, what are you going to make it about? And I was like, well, I'm in Bitcoin at the time. There's like all this weird chain of events that lead to me having a Bitcoin podcast, and there's just a lot of luck in there. I mean, like I say, it doesn't matter what I had done, I would have worked hard and hopefully had a good career. But to get to the point where you're interviewing the president of a country and owning your local football team is, I mean, I'm the luckiest guy in the world.
Speaking of that interview, I've heard you talk about it a little bit, listened to the interview, but what was that like? How did it feel different than other interviews? Were you nervous to sit down with Bukele? Balancing all of those things of Bukele, the controversial figure he is, but also El Salvador is doing better, it seems, and you hear, all these conflicting things. Where was your head at the time going into sit with him and chat?
I mean, I was nervous. I don't get nervous in interviews anymore, and I was very, very nervous in that one. Very nervous because there's a lot of pressure on me. I knew it wouldn't just be the eyes of Bitcoiners, but there would be people working for large media organizations, people working for three-letter institutions.
I was going to say, you had mentioned that, and that did not surprise me. And for those, I think you had mentioned in one of your podcasts, whether it's CIA, FBI, something weird, it seemed a little bit like some correspondence was trying to come in.
Yeah, there's some weirdness going on there, but you just knew there's a lot of different people who might look at that interview, so I felt the pressure. But there was this other weird thing going on, is that my back had gone and I had sciatica, and so I woke up on the morning of the interview. I couldn't sit down. I was like, every time I sat down, it was like a hot poker going my leg. I was like, what is going on here? So I ended up having to take a lot of painkillers just to be able to sit down, and I had to time the painkillers because of them wearing off, so they would hit at the point where I sat down. During the interview, I thought I was going to vomit at one point because I was full of painkillers. I'd had a whiskey. His brother gave me a whiskey before we started. So it was really weird, but like, he was really accommodating. It was I've interviewed him twice now. It was a great interview. In hindsight, I think I could have done it better. But and then afterwards, I got on the plane, went home. I got on the plane back to the UK, and I had like a real. You don't often stop and look back and go, wow, look at what's happening here. Like when we won the league as a football team, I haven't really ever taken that in. But I got on the plane after that one. I sat down. I was just thinking, wow, there was a period, whenever it was 5 years ago, previous to that, where I was in a mess on drugs in the back of an ambulance because I had an SVT. I was about to lose my house. My marriage had collapsed, and my company had collapsed. Like, everything was rubbish, and I was kind of rock bottom and saw no way out of that. And here we are, 4 years later. I'm interviewing the president of a country, and I was like, yeah, you know what? You can turn life around. It can be all right.
That's one of my favorite things about podcasts and talking with people, I think similar to you, is like, we want to hear about these human stories. Like, yes, it's about Bitcoin where, we got particular focuses, but that's absolutely incredible, and huge and crazy. Like, I even just hearing that, it blows my mind every time. And I think too, your unique position, and what I appreciate about you is, and hopefully there's more, but you have been the bridge to normal mainstream conversations about Bitcoin. I truly believe that. And that's one of the things that we still need. We're early on in Bitcoin in general, but still early on to where it's not just a cypherpunk libertarian conversation. Like, I can say, hey, go listen to this episode of Peter, and know that they're going to get more or less a thing that doesn't sound completely crazy, completely. And again, not because of the political tinge, but because when you're talking about, you've mentioned it's really magic internet money. It's hard to relate. I had a friend come over the other day and like, oh, what are you up to? Because, recently, and I've been public about it on Twitter, I was laid off. So, similar kind of life situation. What am I doing? So I'm like, oh, I've been doing this Bitcoin podcast. Like, let me say it without them thinking I'm completely, this is Trey's like depressed, unemployed phase or something like that. It's still a bit awkward.
Well, the thing is, when you do a podcast and you start to get to the point where, like, a lot of people are listening, and you started getting these weird places where, like, I had an England cricketer texting me because he wanted to buy Bitcoin. I had an England footballer, ex-England captain, texting me, and I get invited to things. Yeah, the other day I went to, it was Sting. Sting played in Bedford, and his son supported him. His son's also a musician. His son said the best thing about Bedford is Rail Bedford has put Bedford on the map. And so I go and meet Sting's son, and I'm giving him Rail Bedford jerseys. A bit like, there's so many weird things. It's just so weird. And so the one thing I've always tried to do is just not change who I am. If you speak to my dad or my friends, they'll say Pete is exactly the same now as he was 20 years ago. Like, I still wear metal t-shirts, grow my hair, change my, like, wear my cap backwards. I have not changed, and I, yeah, my views have changed and evolved, and some things got better and worse. But I've really tried to just stay as me as a person, and I think that's maybe why the podcast works for some people, not others. Some listen and go, yeah, it's a bit like me with Rogan. I disagree with Rogan on things, but I trust when he says what he says, he believes it, and like, I want people to know, like, all right, Pete gets things wrong, or I disagree with him, but I think he's being honest. And that's what I've tried really hard to maintain, because once you get audience captured and you start holding opinions you don't believe in for the sake of being successful, then that's difficult. And that's why I think some people don't like my show or don't like me, because they want me to change. They want me to become what they are or agree with them, and I just don't.
Yeah, and that's this podcast is small. I think there's a huge opportunity for it to grow more. But I've even had people reaching out, saying, oh, you should have this person on, or you should talk about this, or you should talk about that. And that's something that, I'm sure I'll reach out to you about as well. And, we chatted about it a little bit, but it's even hard. It's not hard for me, because the one thing I'm like, this is only going to work if people feel that I'm connecting with the guests, if I'm being authentic, because I can tell. I've listened to some, even some, you can't control this, but guests on your show, guests on others, when I'm like, I'm not getting authenticity from them. It sounds like a sales pitch, and I don't connect with those episodes. I don't connect with that story, right? And like your point to Joe Rogan, sometimes I think he might have the most idiotic takes, or I'm like, gosh, why is he talking about this? But again, it's that authenticity. I know he's being authentic to himself. I know when he's talking, he believes it, like you say, and that's compelling. That's a starting point for anyone to listen or trust you. Not the point. Again, the point of Bitcoin is not to trust. The point of your podcast isn't trust Peter. The point is Peter being authentic, and people like authentic human connection, because we're really, year after year, people are yearning for that, right?
Well, because there isn't enough of it about anymore, but it's a cheat code. Like, it's like on Twitter, saying the words, I got this wrong, I'm sorry, is a cheat code. People don't want to do it. People will double down. There's inertia to it. But they should, because what will happen is people will go, oh, wow, thanks. Oh, well, I appreciate you. And they will trust you more. And so I think there's maybe, when you asked me before, that search for the truth, it's like, it's I think if you're trying to be truthful internally, then you're trying to find it externally. But if you are not being truthful internally, then why would you go and try and find it? So there's people, I could give you endless profiles on Twitter. I know they're full of shit. They know they're full of shit. But then, and they're not finding the truth, because truth isn't important to them. Yeah, what's important to them is likes, retweets, whatever. And so, like, my Twitter, I never really blow up that much, because my takes are all over the place, because you can't confine me to one camp, because I'm not captured, and unfortunately there isn't enough of that. And I feel like a bit of a dick saying it. It's almost like, oh, look at me, I'm so great, I'm so authentic. I don't know. It's just, this is the way I've been brought up, and I've just not changed.
It's also easier though. Like, if you don't have to keep up with a lie, if you could, it's not lazy is the wrong word, but it's easier. Just be yourself and run your life that way. Now, listen, if yourself or part of yourself is, like you have mentioned, drug addict, you're drinking yourself to sleep every night, you're terrible to people in your life, sure, maybe some changes are required. But I mean, be yourself in terms of, like, I got this wrong, this is what I think, have this authentic conversation, and I think the world would be a better place. And I don't think anyone would disagree if those in power, politicians, Jay Powell, whoever, would say, got this wrong. But that's like the matrix glitching. You can't, you're not allowed to do that. That's why I'm a bit done with that structure. And again, I'm saying this as my opinion, a progressive, and people do need to separate more and more. And I've mentioned this. I think Margot and Troy are great examples of this. I think Troy is probably just done talking about politics, right? Margot seems to still be a bit in that camp of like left-leaning, wanting to talk about it, right? And I find myself in that camp as well. Just because we're progressive does not mean we're supportive of the state as it is, or of like, oh, let's work within that system. A lot of progressives started to wanting to bust out of the system before those on the right did, when the right was still in power, when George Bush, even before that. And listen, I'm 30 years old, right? So when 9/11 happened, I was in like third or fourth grade, right? But that was foundational for me. 2008 was foundational and informative for me, and just old enough to start, playing on to that in that millennial generation.
Well, I think the Democrat Party has made a lot of mistakes over the last 4 to 8 years that have really damaged them as a party, as the Conservative Party in the UK has. The Conservative Party has drifted away from traditional conservative values. They're essentially, center right now, but with a lot of, very because basically what's happened in the UK is like it's very hard to divide the two parties now. But I think that, I think there's been a lot of own goals scored by the left in America, and those own goals have then been weaponized by the right or the right media and commentators. And so I think one of the best examples is Bernie Sanders. I think Bernie Sanders wouldn't have been great as a president because I think he wanted to give too much free stuff away. But if that's who the people wanted to vote for, give them who they want. Let them make the mistakes. Let them see the mistakes. It's like when you try and protect your children from making mistakes. You don't say no to them. They don't learn from their mistakes. And so you have to allow people to make mistakes. And the DNC blocked Bernie from running, and he probably would have won that election, probably would have beaten Trump. And so I think they've made so many mistakes. And now, like, I think the left has just got, parts of the left have just got so fucking wild and so lost from reality that they've really I can imagine there are a lot of Democrats in America who are kind of embarrassed to admit they are because of some of the crazy super left stuff, as people on the right are probably embarrassed by ultra right people.
Well, that's probably 80%, that majority, right? That where Twitter is the 2% of extremes, that majority in the middle is like, gosh, nothing's getting better. Inflation's out of control. Like that's stupid. We don't care about that. We don't care about that, but we're just going to live our lives. Like people are just trying to live their lives.
But I think you might be on the right track where you're saying, we can't change this. So what can we focus on that's different? Well, let's focus on empowerment. And empowerment is truth, information, money. It's all that stuff that we can control. So better media, better content, better money. Balaji was talking about, what did he talk to me about? Media, money, and military. And so media, we've got kind of decentralized media now, which is great. Money, we've got Bitcoin. I mean, military, I think the only decentralized version you've got is your Second Amendment rights. And that's not a rabbit hole I want to go down. But where can I make a difference? I can make a difference by empowering people, by helping them learn about the financial system, how they can protect themselves, and by distributing better content. And in that, if I can have some sanity in the middle, rather than like attaching myself to ideologically to one group, then hopefully that will help people.
So from your end, a couple other thoughts. If someone from the left is listening to this, a progressive, my hope is that, a lot of people, especially early on, might be Bitcoiners. They might come listen because they've seen me a little bit, most likely come listen because you're on this podcast. But for anyone from the left that stumbles in like progressive Bitcoiner, let me check this out. What are some of your biggest arguments or kind of the easiest selling points for progressives in the US? And again, I understand across the world, a lot of people have reached out and asked me. Anita Posh was one, like, what is progressive? Like, it's not, I understand, but the progressive values of the left, everyone has their context of that. And that's what I'm also trying to talk about, because this is a global podcast. We've got a lot of different countries, low downloads, but a lot of countries that listen in. So for you, what are the selling points?
I would approach it differently. If somebody is a progressive, listen to this show, they're not there on Bitcoin yet, I would say discard everything you've heard so far.
Yeah.
Discard
good starting point.
Just discard everything you've heard so far, that it is boiling the oceans, it is an environmental disaster, that it's used by terrorists and drug dealers and money laundering. Discard everything you've heard. Go and buy Jason Maier's book, The Progressive Case for Bitcoin, or A Progressive's Case for Bitcoin.
Yeah, with an amazing foreword I've heard from
it's
someone.
Pretty good.
It's good.
uh, then write down your questions that you have. The things you don't understand or the challenges you have. Then find a local meetup and go and ask those questions. That's what I would do. But it's a small investment of time to because if we're right about this, which I think we are, and you're wrong, it's going to economically benefit you by understanding Bitcoin, and it's going to benefit the policies that are important for you. If you care about the wealth gap, if you care about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, well, then you should study Bitcoin and understand why Bitcoin, can support I don't know if it's a closing of the wealth gap, but a more fairer financial system so the poor aren't getting poorer. If you think Bitcoin is bad for the environment, go and read Jason's book and go and understand what's happening with Bitcoin mining and the grid in places like Texas. If you believe that, by the way, and I think we should be focusing on nuclear over wind, but if you believe we should have more renewables, go and understand how Bitcoin mining is leading to investment in renewable energy. Just go and read the book, assemble your questions and go to a local meetup. There'll be a meetup somewhere that you can get to, and also, or drop me an email or drop Trey an email. I'll reply. Come with your questions, but don't discard Bitcoin just because a conservative who's a Bitcoiner. Or don't discard Bitcoin because Elizabeth Warren said something or you read something in the New York Times. Discard all of that. You've been hit with misinformation. Just go and read Jason's book, and then go and talk to a Bitcoiner with your questions. That's the approach I would take, because I could give different reasons. I can talk about the wealth gap or climate change, but the truth is, each person's going to have their own individual points, which is important to them, the things they care about most of all, right?
And the biggest starting point for me too is, if you look at the current system, how has wealth inequality been shaping up under the current inflation, money printing, asset and home prices increasing? Who has that benefited? In those old terms, the 1%. So that system clearly is not working. Look at Bitcoin at least consider that, because you trying to work within this system, and that's one of the reasons why being a progressive, being in Massachusetts where I'm based, Elizabeth Warren is one of the most infuriating for me, because her work in 2008 and since on banking regulation, this and that, it's like she's supporting banking regulation, but then de facto supporting JP Morgan Chase and centralization of banks. And again, I know regardless of intention, a lot of what we've seen in the past is she does want life to be better for working class folks, at least at some point. The past couple of years, I'm not sure that's even the case anymore, but at one point, that was her intention. But her policies and rhetoric has been only supporting the continuation of wealthy elite and wealth inequality. Period.
Well, that leads to another important point. Again, if you're a progressive, listen to this, or you're not a Bitcoiner, one of the great things about learning about Bitcoin is you then learn about other things that you didn't know about. So, learn about money, learn about the financial system, learn about Wall Street, learn about taxation, learn about inflation. Go read Ovik Roy's article from FreeOp about inflation, where they talk about even a small amount of inflation, even low inflation, has a compounding effect on the poorest in society. Okay, go and learn about that. Just go and learn about all these things. You don't even need to buy Bitcoin. But I guarantee you, what you think is true, there's a good chance it's wrong. And the things you believed were true up until this point might be lies. And the sooner you get away from thinking the problem is left, free, right, and you start realizing it's them v us, and the politicians are no longer really representing the electorate how they should be, and how they've created this beast that feeds on fiat money and requires the eternal printing of money, which damages you, the better you will be armed to understand the world around you. Because, like I say, I think we've both got to the point where we probably won't vote. It doesn't change the fact of what I believe, but I understand what's going on a bit better. And so if that Bitcoin rabbit hole leads you down other rabbit holes, you're only going to benefit. I mean, I don't know anyone who's done the real work. Yeah, not friends who've read a couple of articles of Bitcoin, but people have gone down the rabbit hole, read a couple of books, listened to a few podcasts, have gone, yeah, do you know what? That Bitcoin thing's not for me. Yeah, once you've taken the orange pill, there's no coming back.
Yeah, but I think even to be willing to do that, you got to first come to a place where you've already established, all right, I've seen enough of the current system or enough behind the veil that I want something else, right? Like for me, early on, initially with my own story, it was, okay, I work in nonprofits, I've got some student loan debt, these stocks and stuff, this isn't looking too great. The inflation, I want to diversify a little bit, so it's Bitcoin. Then finding your show, don't even remember how I found it, but then hearing Alex Gladstein, hearing about humanitarian stuff as someone from the left, global issues, hearing about the Trojan horse theory, that even if people have misaligned incentives, or not misaligned, but terrible incentives of greed, or they want more Bitcoin and this and that, it's still going to benefit. That's the great, and there's never been anything like it. This whole, you should fight climate change, or this company should donate to this because it's the right thing to do. This free market capitalist, it's the right thing to do. Do that. Or this government is going to do it because they care, or this person's going to do it because they want to. No. This works no matter what, regardless of people's incentives. That's what's brilliant. For me, that was like okay, this could actually work, because I was mistrusting of the world, and like the world is kind of evil. So it's good, but it's also evil. This fits both camps. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, look, it goes back to what you said earlier. What does Bitcoin solve? What are the problems it solves? Once you identify those, it becomes very clear that Bitcoin solves the same problems for people of the left to the right. It solves the needs of humans outside of politics. But you have to get to that point where you realize, actually, yeah, they might believe in the Second Amendment, and they might believe in that abortion is evil, but their fundamental basic needs as a human to survive and support their family are exactly the same as mine. And once you start realizing that, the other stuff will start to go away.
That's awesome. Well, I want to just ask you one more thing in terms of,
Sure, man.
What you got going on the rest of this year. So I think you mentioned you and Danny are going out to like Africa in December, but what does your world look like the next 6 months for a year?
Yeah. 4 more films. So I'm going to Argentina next month
to make 4 more?
Yeah. Wow. So I'm going to Argentina next month to make a film about living under high inflation. September, I'm going to head to Lebanon. I'm going to be making a film about living in a failed state. So a state is actually failed. What does that mean? I'm going to go out to Canada in October and make a film about revisiting the trucker story, kind of like what happened, what really happened here. And then December, I'm going to head out to Africa and make a film about what's happening there. And then around those events, I'll obviously be making podcasts and whatever. But yeah, it's going to be a busy year, and hopefully continue to improve my skills as a filmmaker.
That's incredible. That's awesome.
Oh, and hopefully we're going to win another league.
Yeah. Cool. So where do you want to point people? Anything for people to look out for? I obviously highly recommend, if you're new into Bitcoin, check out Peter's podcast. It's a great initial first step. But anything else you want to share?
Yeah, check out the podcast. It's called What Bitcoin Did. It will have a range of voices on there. People you agree with, people you disagree with. Go and check it out. Let me know what you think. And if you like football, soccer, check out Real Bedford, my football team.
Yeah, and Tottenham, right? That's a good one to follow right here.
Be careful.
Yeah. All right. Anything we didn't cover or mention that you wanna throw out there?
No, just good luck, man. Just go do this, and I'm the episodes I'm looking forward to most in yours are where you have conservatives on your podcast.
Yeah, I'll mention a couple I got off air here that I'm excited about. But
all right,
thank you, Peter. Super appreciate it. Thank you for jumping on.